In this presentation, we'll talk about analyzing literature. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to understand how literature can be used in life and why analyzing literature is an important skill, list and define common elements of fiction, analyze literature by reading it carefully and taking a closer look at individual elements, and write a literary analysis. So, what exactly is literature? Literature is a broad term for written works from a variety of genres, including fiction, poetry, and drama. Fictional literature can range from novels to short stories and even comic books. Why study literature? Studying literature can benefit you in several courses, such as reading, writing, philosophy, history, sociology, and language courses. You can also use storytelling skills in your everyday life. For example, you may need to explain to a professor why you were late for class by detailing the events that led to your tardiness. Telling stories also contributes to our identities, developing our own characters and purposes in life. Additionally, many people enjoy reading, and studying literature can help you to better understand stories so that you can learn from them and apply their lessons to your life. Discussing and decoding the message of literature with your peers can encourage different interpretations and help you learn to engage more meaningfully with others. Or perhaps you have a passion for music and would like to study the lyrics of your favorite artist. Whatever your purpose, learning to analyze literature can benefit you in many ways. In this presentation, we'll focus on analyzing fictional literature, though many of the elements we discuss can also be applied to poetry and drama. When analyzing fiction, you'll want to start by reading the work carefully and slowly. Circle and define any words or allusions that you're unfamiliar with, and make note of various elements of fiction that you may come across. We'll go over several of these elements in this presentation. The overall purpose for analyzing literature is to help you better understand the meaning of the work that you're reading by pulling it apart and taking a closer look at its individual elements. One element that you'll want to keep an eye out for is theme. A theme is the central concept or underlying message of a story. Stories can have both major themes and minor themes. Themes are usually not explicitly stated in the story. Instead, you have to find them by searching the text for symbols or motifs that are used repeatedly, or by discovering morals or lessons that are implied by the story. Themes can fit into broad categories such as love, growth, nature, death, and good versus evil. But a good story does more than just revolve around a theme. It says something particular about a theme. For example, Romeo and Juliet is more than just a story about love. It's a story about how two people can develop a love so fiery and passionate that it can result in pain and violence. Analyzing the theme of a story is a great way to help you understand its overall purpose. Another literary element is plot. The plot is a story's sequence of events and focuses on describing what happens in the story. The plot of a story can be broken up into three parts: the beginning, the middle, and the end. The beginning of a story, also known as the exposition, usually introduces the setting of a story by describing where and when it takes place, introduces the characters of a story, sets the tone of a story, and introduces the conflict of the story, which is generally a problem that the main character needs to solve. The middle of a story consists of rising action, or events that are generated by the conflict. Typically, characters will act either alone or with or against other characters in order to solve a problem or reach a goal. The middle of the story ends with the climax, or the point of greatest intensity. This is where the main character reaches his or her turning point. Finally, the end of the story contains the resolution. This is where the conflict of the story is resolved, for better or worse. Usually, the end is the shortest part of a story. Most stories are linear, meaning that they start at the beginning and move linearly through time until they reach the end. However, some stories begin in medias res, meaning in the middle of things, or use flashbacks or flash forwards to tell the story non-linearly. Another element of fiction is the use of characters. As mentioned before, characters are often introduced at the beginning of a story. The writer will often reveal characters a few details at a time. The writer may choose a few key descriptive details to show you what the characters look like and/or reveal their personalities through the use of dialogue, action in the story, and the way they interact with other characters. Some characters are central to the story, while others may be less important. If one character seems to be the good guy in a story, we call that character the protagonist. Similarly, we call the bad guy, or the character that the protagonist has to work against, the antagonist. You can also categorize characters by type. Characters can either be round or flat, and dynamic or static. Round characters are generally described in detail by the writer. We get to know them both inside and outside. That is, we learn what they look like physically, but the writer also gives us an idea as to what they are thinking and feeling throughout the story. A flat character, on the other hand, is usually only described from the outside. They may only exist to play a particular role in the story, like a doctor or a mail carrier. Flat characters can be described as two-dimensional when compared to round characters who are typically more three-dimensional. Dynamic characters tend to undergo a change throughout the course of the story, often due to something that happens in the climax. Generally, this change happens to the main character and is an effect of that character's actions, choices, or decisions. In contrast, static characters do not seem to learn, change, or grow throughout the story. The next element of fiction that we'll discuss is point of view. Stories can be told from first, second, or third-person point of view. Authors often create a persona and use a particular tone to develop the narrator, which is used to tell the story. These traits are generally revealed at the beginning and can be found in the narrator's attitude toward the characters and in the choice of words the narrator uses to develop his or her voice. Keep in mind that the narrator may or may not be the author herself. For example, Mark Twain wrote the book Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but the narrator of the story is a fictional young boy, Huck Finn. A first-person narrator tells the story as a participant in the action, using pronouns like I, me, my, and us. A reliable first-person narrator tells the story as it really is, while an unreliable narrator may bend the truth. For example, sometimes we change small details in our stories in a way that makes us look better. Or you may read a story and find out at the end that the narrator is insane, so it's difficult for us as readers to believe every word he or she says. A story may also use the second-person point of view, which often addresses the reader from time to time using pronouns like you or your. For example, in the 19th century, it was popular for narrators to ask the readers questions and refer to them as "Dear Reader." Another example can be found in the first line of Moby Dick. Call Me Ishmael asks the reader to refer to the narrator in a particular way. Second-person point of view is usually used alongside first person. Finally, a third-person narrator tells the story as a non-participant, using pronouns like he, she, it, and they to refer to the characters and tell what happens in the story. An omniscient or all-knowing third-person narrator not only tells what happens in the story, but they can also see inside all of the characters' minds and relate what they're thinking and feeling. A selective omniscient narrator can see only inside the mind of one character, generally the main character or protagonist, but not all characters. Lastly, an objective narrator cannot see into any character's mind and simply tells the story through action and dialogue alone. Next, setting refers to the time and place in which a story takes place. Sometimes the narrator tells you directly when the story takes place. Other times, you may have to use context from the story to figure out when it occurs. For example, how do the characters dress, speak, and behave? Remember that just because a story was published on a certain date doesn't necessarily mean that it takes place during that time. Stories can be written about the past, the present, or the future. Also think about how much time passes in the story. A novel may take place over several years, while a short story may focus only on an hour of the character's time. The setting also includes where the story takes place. As readers, we have different expectations of a story that occurs in the Wild West, New York City, or the frozen tundra of Russia. The setting doesn't have to be a real place. It can also be fictional, such as a made-up town or a distant planet. A story may also use a particular locale, such as a saloon in an Old West town. Here, you expect characters to look a certain way. They may be wearing cowboy boots, spurs, and hats, act a certain way. They may be uncivilized, drinking and playing cards, and talk a certain way. They may use Southern dialects, accents, and slang. Finally, the time of year and the weather may contribute to the setting and the overall mood and tone of the story, or it may become a character in itself. For example, in Jack London's To Build a Fire, the freezing Yukon acts as the antagonist of the story. Similarly, you can analyze the historical and cultural context of a story. A story written during World War II will differ greatly from a story written in current times. Taking a closer look at what was going on in a story's particular time and place may help you understand its overall purpose better. Critics of literature often look to details of the writer's personal life to explain the story. Understanding a story's context may require a bit of outside research. You may need to learn more about the author or the political, social, economic, or cultural aspects of the story. Another element of fiction that you can analyze is symbolism. Symbols are things, such as objects, sounds, colors, or words, that invoke emotional, religious, or intellectual associations beyond their literal meaning. For example, the color black may represent death, evil, or darkness, whereas the color green may represent new life, fertility, and hope. An eagle may represent freedom, and a dove may symbolize peace. A wedding ring may be used to represent unity and endurance because it's in the shape of a circle and made of gold. Even weather can serve as a symbol. For example, fog might symbolize confusion or obscurity, and lightning might represent power and strength. Symbols can be found in the connotations of characters' names, too. For example, the name Daisy may symbolize a character who is feminine, gentle, and pretty, while harsh-sounding names like Voldemort may invoke feelings of evil or darkness. Most of the time, the author will give you hints as to what serves as symbolism in the story, but other times they may require you to think outside the box to make connections. Similarly, imagery can also be used as symbolism. Imagery is how an author uses words to paint a picture of what's happening in the story by appealing to a reader's sense of touch, taste, sound, smell, and sight. Including these details enhances the writing and makes it more interesting. An author may also use imagery to create symbolic associations. For example, describing a beautiful, sunny morning might symbolize a fresh start and hope, or it might set a happy and bright tone for the story. Another element of fiction is irony. Irony is a literary device that uses contradictory statements or situations to reveal a reality that is different from what appears to be true. In other words, irony occurs when something happens that is strange or funny because it's the opposite of what you would expect to happen. There are three types of irony: verbal irony, situational irony, and dramatic irony. Verbal irony uses words to express something other than or opposite to the truth. For example, you might look out the window at a thunderstorm and say, "Nice weather we're having." In this example, you're using irony to suggest that the weather is, in fact, not nice at all. Situational irony occurs when the result of events are unusual or unexpected. An example of situational irony might be a fire station burning down, an unexpected and surprising event considering the whole purpose of a fire station is to put out fires. Situational irony can also occur in the setting of a story. An example might be someone dying on a bright, sunny day, or finding out great news on a dark, stormy night. These examples are ironic because you expect happy things to happen during nice weather and bad things to happen during bad weather. Finally, dramatic irony occurs when the reader or audience is aware of information that the other characters in the story may not be aware of. For example, in Romeo and Juliet, the audience is aware that Juliet takes drugs to induce sleep, but Romeo believes she is dead and kills himself, which increases the audience's shock and makes the tragedy of the lovers' deaths more powerful. When analyzing a story, keep an eye out for examples of an irony that may contribute to the story's overall effect on the reader. Finally, satire may use irony, humor, exaggeration, or ridicule to criticize the foolishness or corruption of a person or a group, with the goal of convincing the audience to recognize and possibly change a flaw in our society. For example, political cartoons often depict political figures with exaggerated features and ridiculous outfits doing outrageous things in order to emphasize how bad they or their policies are. Shows like The Daily Show and Saturday Night Live often use satire to ridicule current events through the use of humor. Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal exposes the Irish government's poor response to famine by suggesting that the Irish breed and eat babies to bring economic recovery. If this seems shocking and revolting to you, then you've grasped his purpose for writing. He's suggesting an ironic and absurd solution in order to mock the government's failures. Another example is Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery, which uses the unnecessary murder of a villager to show that society should stop practicing traditions that are outdated and useless. Next, we'll take a closer look at how to write a literary analysis. Once you've read the work carefully, defined words and allusions that you're unfamiliar with, and annotated the literary elements that you found throughout the work, you can start writing a literary analysis. The purpose of a literary analysis is to develop an interpretation of the work in order to better understand its overall meaning. One way to do this is to show how literary elements are used in the story to develop a particular theme. For example, after reading Romeo and Juliet, you may interpret the story to serve as a warning to readers that passionate love can result in pain and violence. Another way to analyze a story is to look for contradictions or tensions within it. Perhaps the ending of the story was shocking, and you believe that shock was used to convince the reader to make some kind of change in society. Or maybe you noticed that the main character struggled to make a tough choice that resulted in him learning a life lesson. Whatever you decide, remember that writing an analysis involves breaking the text into smaller parts in order to better understand the whole. A literary analysis should be organized similarly to other types of essays. In your introduction, you should introduce the work you'll be analyzing by providing the full title and the author's name, along with any other context necessary to understand your analysis, such as the genre of the work or the publishing year. In 1 to 2 sentences, briefly summarize the work. You don't need to include too many details here. Instead, assume that your reader has also read the text in full. End your introduction with a clear thesis statement that focuses on analyzing and interpreting the text in some way. You should also list your supporting reasons in your thesis and discuss them in the same order in your body paragraphs. Here's an example of an interpretive thesis for a literary analysis. In Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare uses symbolism, irony, and imagery to warn readers that passionate love can result in pain and violence. This thesis gives the reader an idea as to what main points the writer will be discussing in each body paragraph. When writing your body paragraphs, be sure to use topic sentences at the beginning of each paragraph and transitions to move from point to point. Support your thesis with evidence from the text that you're analyzing. For example, if you thought that the story used symbolism to show how passionate love can result in pain and violence, provide examples of symbolism from the text and talk about how they prove your argument. Lastly, you should end your analysis with a conclusion that reiterates your thesis and main points. Make sure that your audience understands why your analysis is important to understanding the overall message of the text. Let's review. In this presentation, we discussed how literature can be used in life and why analyzing literature is an important skill, common elements of fiction, how to analyze literature by reading it carefully and taking a closer look at individual elements, and how to write a literary analysis. Thanks for watching.